of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast. Here is the king of podcasts.
Whole lot of layoffs in the news. We're going to talk about them here on the Broadcasters Podcast. And, unfortunate for them, the media. Why am I so qualified and equipped to go and talk about this? Well, because coming up January 30th, which is this weekend, officially what, Monday? No, Tuesday. Tuesday, that's right. As of next Tuesday, coming up, I will be celebrating my 30th year in media. So my career goes as follows, okay? So after I finished college, and I worked at FAU's, Florida Atlantic University's campus radio station and campus newspaper. I was a freelance reporter for the newspaper, and I worked as a music director and a host on several programs for WOWL, AM, then FM, just so you know, before they became FAU Owl Radio. So the campus radio station, I worked for them. At the same time, I was also an adjunct. I was a freelance reporter for the Palm Beach Post for 4 years, all throughout college. Worked with WPBF, Channel 25, an ABC affiliate, for 4 years. And then I moved on to do other things. I still worked with the Palm Beach Post for a while after that. And then I worked for Clear Channel. I was with them off and on for 6 years. 2005, I joined my current company right now, New Gen Broadcasting, now called International Web Marketers. And I've been with them. It'll be 20 years coming up in August. And at the same time, in 2012, I started doing my podcast series here independently, kingofpodcasts.com. And then everything else came in after that. And I must say, after, going through the series right now, so again, since 2018 I started this. This is year 6 I'm doing the program. It's amazing that this program has gotten so much of a groundswell. And I've got to go and thank Lou Pate, of course, my wonderful, friendly radio journeyman that has been on and has done so much for me in the past, and he won't give himself enough credit for what he's done. But the Lou Pate bump, I will call it, did help. And of course, his appearances on the on WPHT, on WCCC, among others, that he allowed me to go and join him on during some of his occasional, fill-in appearances. I know I got somewhat of an audience to the Mazzoli Army and all those out there. Thank you so much for finding the show and sticking with it this whole time. And of course, I really do appreciate it, because now this show has become much more downloadable. It's been one of the most listened of my programming right now on the lineup, because of the fact that, it used to be my wrestling program was the most popular show I had on my portfolio of podcasts, but now it's the it's the Broadcasters Podcast, which is the one I hoped I was going to get soon enough, because that was the one I always had a lot of passion for. Like, I love my wrestling program. I love my program on, dieting. It's me on dating, society, and relationships, called the Depraved and Debauchers. I love those shows. I love doing them. But this show's been my passion project. This is the one I've always really had the biggest part, because it was my career. And of course, my career's always made something to me. And, podcasting was a place to go, because I know if I went and stayed in radio or stayed in television, at some point I would have been in the same boat as some of my fellow media folks right now that are getting unemployed. And the Broadcasters Podcast in its time, I can tell you that I have taken many times where I have discussed the unfortunate mishaps of more than a few times seeing this happen, to where the same thing happens over and over again. It's a shame to see here more of the same as before. How many times are they going to talk about the media just falling apart again, and more layoffs like before? But it happens way too often. I can go back to past episodes where I've done it. iHeartMedia layoffs, that was back in January 2020. And I did through that for a while. Layoffs when it came to social media back in November 2022. Twitter and Meta had all layoffs. And in traditional media, at 2022, I said, would this be the year that traditional media becomes extinct? The traditional media establishment. 2 years ago. Almost 2 years ago. We're back once again. The same thing as before. More layoffs. And we go back to, what was it? Back at the time, NPR put a hiring freeze in, cutting $10 million from their annual budget back in 2022. And there were more. Axios put a full report on this and talking about all the companies that went down. Warner Brothers Discovery, when they did their merger, laid off staffers. Paramount Global, cutting jobs. Now I'm going to be merging at some point because we've talked about that at the start of the year. Possible merger talks. Disney had announced layoffs at that point. Comcast had made cuts. Roku had made cuts. 5% of the workforce. Then there were more. Vice Media. Gannett. Now we do it once again. We're back to cutting. When you are part of a big corporate structure, okay, they do not worry about the content. We don't get investigative reporters. We don't get people that get outside of their Twitter feed and go out and not just go on a phone call or FaceTime or Zoom call. They actually go out, get their recorders, get their pens and pads, and go write stories. Go report on stories. Go find a story. Go drive, walk, transport yourself to where you need to go to where the story's at. Answer the 5 damn questions. Who, what, when, where, and why. But that doesn't happen anymore. Once again, we are in the same boat as before. It doesn't change. So damn unfortunate. So let's go into it. Here's what we got so far in the current case of more layoffs. The first one that caught my attention was the LA Times. And this was early in the week. They plan to cut 20% of their newsroom. 115 employees at the most. Or at least, excuse me. One of the largest staff cuts in the 143-year history of the paper. The LA Times Guild walked off the job last Friday to protest the imminent layoffs, the institution's first ever newsroom union work stoppage. 94 of those union members will be let go. Many of the departments and clusters across the newsroom will be heavily hit. Totally devastating, nonetheless far lower than the number of layoffs the bargaining committee was expecting last week. So senior editors, photographers, members of the video union were part of the purge. And the cuts were necessary because the LA Times can no longer lose up to $40 million a year without boosting advertising and subscription revenue, according to the paper's owner, Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong. And layoffs and buyouts have hit a wide swath of the news industry over the last year. Washington Post, NPR, CNN, Vox Media are among the many companies being hit. An estimated 2,681 news industry jobs were lost at the end of November, according to the firm of Challenger Gray and Christmas. More than the full 2 years of 2022 and 2021. 2,681 jobs, news industry jobs. And last June, the LA Times had already cut out another 70 positions, about 13% of their newsroom. The union said in a statement that this staffing cut is the fruit of years of middling strategy, the absence of a publisher, and no clear direction. Now, Soon-Shiong is a biotech billionaire. He acquired the Times in 2018, returned it to local ownership 2 decades later. It was sold to the Tribune Company, and the purchase raised hopes of years after years of cutbacks, circulation declines, and leadership changes. I don't know why this guy bought this paper. The Tribune already took it down to the ground, and now we're at this point. So, same thing goes once again. The Poynter Institute took a big point, said that Tuesday was a bleak day for the industry because Time Magazine and National Geographic also conducted layoffs. We heard about Sports Illustrated also conducting major layoffs. Basically, the entire paper, the entire publication wiped out. Condé Nast journalists are struck over proposed job cuts. So they go along and then they say now, many younger journalists of color were laid off, according to the Poynter Institute. The union estimates that in the LA Times Guild, they said that 33% of their Latino caucus will lose 38% of their members, the Black caucus, 33%. Asian American, Pacific Islander, Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia caucuses will lose 34% of their combined membership. And it could have been avoided if the company agreed to offer buyouts and said, but no. On X, Times reporters shared that they were laid off via a webinar that had the chat window disabled, so they couldn't ask questions. One reporter said they got their notice while on a work trip for the Times. National Geographic and Time magazines held layoffs on Tuesday. Neither company responded to requests for comment. A health and science reporter for Time shared on X that she and 12 other journalists had lost their jobs, and the Union for Time's editorial staff had announced the layoffs had included 15% of its members. Time says they need to continue to increase revenue while managing operating costs efficiently. And over the last year, they diligently reduced her expenses. Still more work to be done. But these big corporate companies, the same thing goes once again. You know, they don't know anything to do. They have no way to go ahead and get content to go ahead and build interest in these publications again, or build more of their digital footprint. No. We're in the same thing as, again, let's just do cost cutting, because it's the same thing that corporate media will do all the time. Continue to cost cut. Sure, the inflation's doing a bad thing to it, but what are they doing for themselves? Pitchforks against Sports Illustrated have laid off staff. Condé Nast is currently negotiating layoffs with one of its unions. They're planning to cut 5% of its workforce, which is roughly 270 people. And journalists being represented there are Vogue, Vanity Fair, GQ, and several other brands. And negotiations broke down when the company rescinded a severance offer and put forth a lesser package. And there have been strikes going on in protest of the company's bad faith bargaining, which, by the way, nobody's talking about. This is not like the actors or writers strike. These news writers, these journalists, we don't hear anything about. Actress Hannah Hathaway actually walked out of a Vanity Fair photo shoot upon learning of the strike, according to Variety. 94 layoffs are at stake. So all of that's going on, and it sucks for them. But once again, the same thing goes, as always. The national level, CNN, Washington Post, NPR, Vice Media, Sports Illustrated, Vox Media, NBC News, CNBC, other organizations cutting swaths of their reporting staff. So who's going to do the work for them? There's all these reporters, all the journalists. So expendable they are. So the worst year for job cuts in journalism since COVID-19 upended the world in 2020, when 2,700 jobs were eliminated. Now, CNN decides to put their spin on why this happens. This is their explanation. See, we don't get the story about, let's just tell the story as it is. We have to get to their opinion, which they can't separate it to another story. They have to go ahead and put it here. So we'll go ahead and take their news story, of which they decide to go put an op-ed inside of it, embed it. Quote, audiences that once reliably surfed traditional cable channels and consumed news websites or newspapers are instead absorbing content and spending time on platforms such as Netflix and TikTok, leading to massive declines in ratings and traffic. That shift of behavior has led brands to spend their marketing in emerging digital areas, particularly given their ability to offer advertisers powerful tools to target audiences per position. That's probably true. Okay. Once reliably surfed. Well, that's all we had. We didn't have choices outside of traditional cable or news websites or newspapers before social media. Making matters worse, news outlets have seen their online advertising businesses vanish as social media and search giants devour much of the industry's dollars. Well, you know what? It doesn't help with one of these sites. All these sites have like damn paywalls. And by the way, most of those paywalls, I can overlook them. So sometimes when I see a story out there with a damn paywall, I find my way around it. It's not that hard, folks. You charge too much. And we're not going to go and just go to individual websites to go look for stories. Not all the time. You're not all niche driven. You're all talking about other things. And the worst part is, a lot of you websites, a lot of you publications, you decide to get off of what you're there for, your specific niche, and decide to talk politics. Why? Just research produced by Columbia University in October estimated that technology titans Google and Meta should pay news outlets $14 billion a year in revenue for their search traffic and content. But technology companies have resisted paying publishers for their content and launch high-profile fights to block legislation, intended to recoup some of their lost revenue. Okay. So, yeah, $14 billion would prop up journalism. Well, we should have made a deal with them instead of snubbing them when they were coming on the way up. Right? Hey, Google and Meta, yeah, of course, they aggregated your content. They did make it more available to you. But yeah, you feel like you need, tech company assistance. Is that what it is? So Google and Facebook should just prop you up. They could probably do a better job for themselves. Why do they need you? That's part of the reason. Jay Rosen, an associate professor of journalism at New York NYU, told CNN that, quote, the ad industry doesn't need a news industry when there are so many other ways to purchase attention and so many other ways to target users. The change of behavior has meant news consumers are canceling subscriptions to newspapers and cable providers, cutting precious revenues even further. Well, but also, you got to remember, hey, are you doing enough when it comes to what content you're providing? Right? That's part of the thing too. Like, what are we doing? You're taking away more people that would actually do the work of learning about what's going on with, the stories that are out there. You're getting rid of reporters. You're getting rid of the staff that could be doing more for people. You don't want to do that. You just decide, well, we're just going to do our own thing. Just change out. Jeff Jarvis, the Leonard Toe Professor of Journalism Innovation at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism, has said that proprietors, with few exceptions, did not adapt to the internet. They held on to their old business models, advertising, subscription, and the attention economy. Many of them are now controlled by hedge funds, which will not invest or innovate. Yes, private equity, hedge funds. What also went through the same thing? Radio. See, radio's been going on for this for, 20 years now. Yeah. 20 years plus. We know what happens here. Okay, radio is the original, media massacred entity. It's the first medium that got massacred, thanks to the digital disruption. Newspapers, all these cable outlets, now you're getting the brunt of it. Now you're the next ones down on the chopping block. You're the next ones jumping off the cliff. We're hearing a lot of layoffs right now. We haven't heard bankruptcies yet. That's what's coming next. All those companies are going to get bankrupt eventually. Eventually going to get bankrupt. And then what are you going to have next? Let's go on and talk with Mr. Jarvis here. There's more he says here that he's absolutely right about. So cost cutting is a predictable response to a worsening downward business spiral, making the products of these publications only worse, which will accelerate the spiral. The death of newspapers and magazines and linear TV has been oft foretold and has not yet occurred. But he says the fall might be coming now. The hauling out of large news institutions comes at a perilous time for America. And here's more of the op-ed at CNN doing its work. The hauling out of large news institutions comes at a perilous time for America. Anti-democratic candidates have intentionally worked to undermine faith in news outlets as they look to seize power in election contests from coast to coast, attacking those tasked with the duty of holding public officials accountable. Well, what's happening now is that, we're in the age of autonomy when it comes to technology, right? We don't have the stores, these big box stores, running a lot of counter staff with, when you're going to a checkout counter, you don't have somebody usually there to handle the checkout. That's very, adamant and customer friendly and proficient and vigilant, making sure that all the items that are being put in are not going to get stolen. No, we get the self-checkout. We have standalone kiosks to order order what we want, right? We have much more what we want, more of the economy that's like, we can just pick and choose what we want. We don't have it our way. Well, social media allowed us to have it our way. They created the self-checkout for us. They saw, we don't need to go to NBC or CBS or all the other letter networks to find all of our news. We don't need them anymore. We can pick and choose what we want. We can go to aggregates and pick and choose what stories we want to watch and look for. Nice and easy. Right? I have Google News. And I don't go to their, set page. I go to my For You page based on what I am searching. Because I'm not concerned about news. If I want to find news, I find it on X. And there are some people that I try that are reputable to me that I'll follow and I'll read about them and I'm like, oh, okay. Or they're not necessarily, but at least I'll take them and gauge what they're saying. And also, I want to look at news people that actually do the reporting. Actually give me facts and figures and information, and just don't give me a story where I feel dumb at the end of it. Right? I don't want that. And they go farther and farther into the story more about politics. And I don't care about politics. We're not going to deal with that. Now, in the story here, the Professor Rosen here also says that there are reasons to be optimistic given the hundreds of independent local news organizations that have sprouted up in recent years. The challenge is that the coverage at the hyper-local level is hit or miss. Some communities are well served and others, especially in areas rural or in urban communities of color, they tend to be overlooked. Journalists have to take it upon themselves to treat sustainability as their problem. But this is not what they signed up for. They signed up to do stories. Right. But remember, how many times do we see stories about the journalists who are in a bubble? They come from the same journalistic outlets. They don't really know much about anything else. They just know what they can report. And without somebody helping them to give them the resources, give them the means, the wherewithal to go ahead and report on stories, they don't have anyone. They're kind of left on their own. Digiday also the Ringer talked about this. The news industry is in a dire situation, according to their story. Derek Thompson, Brian Curtis write about this. They host a podcast called Plain English. And here's what they said on the recent program. Derek Thompson says, first of all, they go through the latest death of Sports Illustrated and the general demise of the news media. Sports Illustrated holds a very special place in my heart. It might have been the first magazine I subscribed to. Definitely the first I truly loved when I decided to become a journalist. Brian Curtis talks about that, Authentic Brands Group, they're the owners of Sports Illustrated. They manage brands. They licensed Sports Illustrated to a second company, the Arena Group. On that website, they do innovative technology and media with a cutting-edge playbook that transforms media brands. So the company failed to pay their licensing agreement. Agreement was dissolved. That's where Sports Illustrated went away. Derek Thompson writes, he says, why is it not just one or two magazines or one or two newspapers that are struggling? It's dozens closing every year. It's dozens failing every decade. To me, you could tell this is a pure technology story, or you could tell it's a people story. Technology is that the internet comes along and really starts to pick up steam with Craigslist and Google in 2000, 2004, 2005. Facebook takes over in the late 2000s, 2010s. Internet increases supply, and suddenly anybody can be a blogger, can compete with old-fashioned newspapers for people's attention. So you're increasing supply, destroying local advertising monopolies like the Washington Post. And when it comes to people, the great era of newspapers that when they went online first in the 90s, early 2000s, they were all free and did not say, hey, guess what, folks? You got to pay for news. This is important. Put your credit card in here. And we could argue to that period of the internet, that would have been a weird thing to try to pay for news. The New York Times was free at that point, and they might have still have picked the glittering, big, fat national newspaper over the skimpier local paper, but there was certainly some truth to that. So technology has made its way. The digital disruption I've always talked about, which is one of the reasons I talk about this program constantly, is the same thing that happens here over and over and over. New York Times reports on this. I'm surprised they can still get so many people to write on this, but they got 4 people in the byline on their story on this, talking about the news business. So let's talk about that. But they're also concerned about there's an election year, and now all these news outlets are starting to go away. One person says that a new reality has sunk in. Washington Post, shedding reporters and editors. Cable news ratings are falling amid an uncompetitive presidential primary contest. Sports Illustrated gutted overnight. Northwestern University's middle school says that 5 local newspapers, on average, are closing every 2 weeks. So now we're getting so-called news deserts with limited access to news about their hometowns. Of the 1,100 public radio stations and affiliates, only 1 in 5 is producing local journalism. And they're publicly funded. They're government funded. Andrew Hayward says that, quote, at a time when America arguably needs some more solid news coverage, than ever. It's very disturbing to see economic forces arrange so powerfully against traditional news sources. He says it's not just disturbing, it's dangerous. And it's gone on for years, but a painful confluence of challenges has resulted in the carnage. Americans are suffering from news fatigue, inundated with major stories like the coming election, the wars in the Middle East and Ukraine, and those who do follow the news have increasingly turned to social media and anti-establishment sites that exist outside legacy organizations. Look, I don't even follow news. Like, I know about the stories about, the wars, the election. I might catch a little bit of it. You know why? Because my father watches the news. He's still old-fashioned about it. Doesn't have a newspaper anymore, but he watches what's on TV and what's online. That's it. So I can't help but go and see that with him. But for the most part, no, not much more. That's it. The media industry, there's a whole lot of things that are going on. The LA Times, again, the journalists that are being laid off. Netflix and Scott Stuber, who brought Oscar-winning filmmakers to Netflix and doing so helped usher the entertainment industry into the streaming era, is leaving the film chairman. So he's out. So companies are spending more of their ad budgets to reach users on Instagram and Google, which turn become less reliable. But remember, news is hurting, but you know what's not hurting? Sports. Advertisers will still go after sports. When they see, listen, you can have events going on television. If the Golden Globes only gets 9 million viewers, the Emmys get, 4.3 million viewers, right? And then you turn around and say, oh, look, NFL, divisional playoffs, 30 million for one game, 50 million for the nighttime game. Yeah. Not going to win on those. Disney, which owns ABC News, shed thousands of jobs last year. NBC Universal losing viewers from its once formidable cable TV news division. NBC News laid off several dozen employees this month. CNN, owned by debt-laden Warner Brothers Discovery, went through a round of layoffs. Paramount, owning CBS News, planning deep cuts, according to a person with knowledge of the discussions. Newspapers, New York Times, New Yorker, and Boston Globe have found success attracting digital subscribers, but there are some green shoots among niche, subscription-based startups that largely focus on a single industry. The onslaught of painful headlines is still an ominous sign for the broader news industry's efforts to force sustainable business models. Washington Post, launched as LA Times, both lost tens of millions of dollars in the last year. The editor for the LA Times resigned after clashing with the paper's owner. Then more layoffs. Mary Louise Kelly, a host of NPR's All Things Considered, wrote on X, quote, if you care about journalism, local news, national news, international news, every warning light should be blinking red. Yeah, DEFCON 5, right? This is a continuation from last year. Because remember, we heard in November 2022 about the layoffs. Then it all started happening afterwards, after Christmas. 2023, Business Insider, LA Times, NPR cut 10% of their staffs. BuzzFeed, the news division, was shut down. Notice we never hear anything from BuzzFeed anymore. I haven't even heard about them and read about them in a long time. News Corp, Fox News, right? Cut 1,250 people. National Geographic laid off its remaining staff writers. Vox Media, 2 rounds of layoffs. Vice Media filed for bankruptcy. There will be more like Vice Media very soon. Just wait for those. Popular Science shut down its online magazine. ESPN, Condé Nast, Yahoo News all cut jobs. Ken Doctor, media entrepreneur and analyst, has said, quote, a new reality has sunk in among legacy media, both print stalwarts owned by billionaires and some of the high-profile national digital players who won such notice a decade ago. Now, the news industry is looking ahead to fresh hurdles posed by the technology of artificial intelligence. Local TV news is one of the bright spots, they say. The local TV news are enduring their own problems, heavier workloads for reporters, even as salaries have stagnated. Many remain in better shape than local newspapers. Well, that's because they still get advertisers. Plus, the local TV, they're covering for a lot more airtime than ever before. I mean, there's not that many syndicated shows to put on anymore that are not schlock, right? I mean, I don't know a lot of people that are putting on Jennifer Hudson or Tamron Hall or what. Is she even on anymore? But Kelly Clarkson, I see her shows, like the one show that I still see that does okay. But other than that, who else? There's not a lot of game shows out there to put on that are syndicated or any other shows, or trying to put on old shows like before. Can't put on classic programming. So, like, what else you got? Americans still place far more trust in local news sources than in national media organizations. 19% of Americans describe their trust in journalists as high or very high in a Gallup survey released this week. 9-point decrease from 4 years ago. we've talked about the decrease of television and of just the media trust. We've talked about it extensively here on this program. When you cannot disseminate, you cannot separate news from opinion editorial. If you can't just give us news stories, okay, that are just the 5 questions: who, what, when, where, and why. If you can't just give us those stories and then another story, which is an op-ed, you can't separate one from the other, there's your problem. Way too much opinion and editorial, not enough facts, not enough news. And then when we have facts that are out there in the particular stories, we have to look through them through a mountain of opinion and editorial, a lot of bias, and a lot of other stuff that we don't need to be reading about. Like, give me the facts, the nuts and bolts. That's it. Who did what? When did it happen? How did it happen? Why did it happen? And where? I mean, are the folks out there just that dumb? Or, I mean, the thing is, the media makes us feel dumb. They dumb down what they give us and deliver as news because that's the way they take everybody. They really want to play down to the lowest common denominator. They want to think that anybody that watches the news is stupid. And they do. So many stories here talking about, the bigger problems that are going on with the media. So the media talking about themselves. And so now here's what's happening that could be a help to these news organizations. There's a proposed bill in California that was proposed last year that would tax large companies like Google and Facebook on news advertising and turn driving salaries for newsroom employees. There have been pushes to pass federal legislation as well. But of course, with the Congress right now, that is so broken down, right? If there's not a supermajority one side or the other, okay, it doesn't matter what slant politically you are, but if there's not one supermajority one way or the other, nothing gets passed. Do you understand? Nothing gets passed. Okay, currently the House of Representatives, what is it like? It's slightly conservative over, liberal, right? And then the Senate is like basically half and half. You barely get anything passed, right? If it's not a supermajority, then nothing gets passed. One of the areas I talk about all the time, cannabis. Can't get past legalization. Cannot. But the bill's been out there, and it's bipartisan support. Like, there's bipartisan bills that can be put out there, but because of the political slant, there's so many things that can't be pushed. Like, we can't get anything done across party line, across the aisle. Doesn't happen. Like, that's not even allowed anymore. It's so tribal. It's one way or the other. We can't work on things together. That doesn't happen anymore. No. Of course, the LA Times is backing the bill, and it will help bring newsrooms back from the dead. But the efforts to help local news outlets have garnered bipartisan support. They've also won opposition from lawmakers from both parties who have been personally upset by news coverage of their doings. There was a law passed in Australia in 2021 that made Google and Facebook negotiate news content contracts with media outlets. And the Australian government said a year later that the law was a success because it enabled news businesses to, in particular, employ additional journalists and make other valuable investments to assist their operations. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. It's always kind of interesting what, the tech companies, we can't do anything about, net neutrality, right? Like, okay, let's make sure that net neutrality cannot be put upon these companies, right? We cannot treat them as utilities. But yet, let's get the news organizations, right? Internet traffic should be made equally according to net neutrality. We can't get equal internet traffic. No, we need to make sure that the mainstream news outlets are getting their content prioritized. And not only prioritized, they need to be paid for it. I'm just asking, does that make sense? Makes sense. Like, I'm not telling you if it's right or wrong. I just want to ask the question. When we have the idea of net neutrality, which cannot get passed, right? The SEC doesn't want to go forward with that. They want to kick it off to other people. But if the SEC decided to go on net neutrality right now and make it where internet service providers should treat all internet traffic equally, and that Google and Facebook and Instagram and all these other social media outlets are going to be treated as utilities. Treated like publishers, right? They could also be subjected to libel and slander lawsuits, right? So we don't want to get them for that. Like, you want to screw the tech companies, right? You want to make sure they can get caught up in lawsuits, right? And you also want to make sure that they can also prioritize all these major mainstream news organizations and pay them to prop them up because they can't make their own money. I want the logic behind that. I want somebody to honestly try to like explain that and tell me, give me the argument that tells me that's a good idea. You can't. You want to try? Hey, come on the program. I ask all the time, who's showing up? Nobody. No one comes over to this program to do that. Oh, no, God forbid. You're not going to do that. Now, granted, I'm about this right now because of the fact that I already went through and I did a story about Vince McMahon because now the Wall Street Journal decided to go ahead and, report another lawsuit of alleged sexual harassment, or much more than that. They're saying sex trafficking on top of that and sexual abuse. But what they did was they decided to go ahead and name the plaintiff in a lawsuit that was actually a part of originally this young lady was part of a $3 million hush money pact. She was secretly not named in the lawsuit. She was kept anonymous. But now the Wall Street Journal finds the idea to go ahead and put her name out there. Poor thing. Anyway, if you want to hear about that story, I actually just did an episode about that right before this. You can catch it on my Wrestling Store podcast right here at kingofpodcasts.com. If you want to find out about that story, I'm not bringing it up here. It's the only thing I'm going to say about it, but you want to go and catch it, you can go and find it over on my other show where I do specifically talk about that. Now, there's other stories I want to bring up a little bit in here when it comes to musicians and other parts. We'll talk about that in a moment, but I just want to make sure that I get to the rest of this now. Okay, let's go and get into one more story about music journalists. They're also feeling the same brunt. We don't hear a lot about that, but a website called Los Angeles Magazine actually talked about it. Hits keep coming as budget cuts massacre music journalism. That there are layoffs, firings, and resignations at Pitchfork, Yahoo, KCRW, Buzz Bands, LA Times, and more. Lena Licaro actually writes about this. Music blog Buzz Bands from former LA Times calendar editor Kevin Bronson has announced a hiatus at the start of the year. The editor is considering the future of the site. Yahoo.com's entertainment section has also gone through their own round of layoffs late last year. Longtime music editor Lindsay Parker. Ethan Alter, one of the coveted Journalists of the Year award by the National Arts and Entertainment Journalism Awards only a couple of weeks prior. Managing editor Chrissy Nguyen, senior correspondent Kevin Pollowy, and reporter Rachel Schufelt were also let go. Yahoo also announced the end of the youth-driven In the Know video platform. They talk about how the video pivot would possibly be the savior of music and pop culture media online. But these days, there is concern that seems that almost quaint in light of entire platforms being plucked for lack of engagement and advertising dollars, regardless of how much multimedia-driven they were. Pitchfork was been given the tagline, the most trusted voice in music, is getting folded into a sister publication, GQ. Many in the writer community are proclaiming the death of music criticism. For real this time, penning think pieces about the loss of where things went wrong. But even before the recent announcements, concert and album reviews have become devalued. They don't get a lot of clicks unless something crazy happens on the show or the writer goes with the jugular on the work. And social media platforms like TikTok and Instagram, providing everyone a place to share their opinions on music, film, fashion, and pop culture free, lack of it is expected. A journalism degree doesn't really hold a candle to a high follower count, and selfie likes these days. Add to this the trend of AI-generated content on sites and blogs to save money, and things are bleaker all around. By the way, I still think about the fact of Tom Likas, the radio host, always talk about how the journalism degree was the most worthless degree you could ever get. I don't think he's wrong, especially now these days. So, in this story, I'm sorry to Lena, but okay, she talks about that there's no one reason for the current onslaught for media struggle, but when it comes to music, technology has forced us all to adapt. Changes have been challenging for Gen X and millennial music lovers, and more so for music makers who barely can even monetize their output on streaming platforms like Spotify and Apple Music. The pandemic was a large blow to live music. Thank goodness it's back at least. How terrestrial radio has survived the current business model is a topic for another day. What? It's not survived. Listen to my show a couple weeks ago. Trust me, it hasn't done that yet. Just saying. The current business model is a topic for another day, but clearly small independent stations like Santa Monica-based KCRW are feeling the strain too. The station announced its own workforce reduction with voluntary departures. More than a dozen staff members also accepted buyout packages will be out by the end of the month. Bandcamp is suffering layoffs, 50% of its staff at the end of the year, last year, and the editorial department was hit as well. So is there any hope for print or online entertainment journalism right now? Of course there is. You're reading this, aren't you? Moreover, many of your favorite media folk are showcasing their work in exciting new ways, from zines to books to streaming. And there are podcasts becoming compelling formats. YouTube is providing an additional visual facet for pods that are only beginning to be fully explored by top shows, both education and entertainment driven. Beyond influencers, journalists can and should use these platforms to showcase our work. Social media is more than a tool for us and can be a way to share short-form reportage within stories, reels, threads, and groups. We just have to find a way to make money from them. And there's an array of newsletters to choose from, many written by journalists, and many are proving indeed an audience for cultural commentary with research, depth, and width. Check out Substack, Beehive, and even Medium for some of the best out there. Very nice, Lena. Thanks so much for that. Still a lot of news going on within the media right now. I just saw that Apple Podcasts is going to start now transcribing content for their podcasts. All the podcasts that are going up there, right? Just read about that today. Let me check what that's all about, because I didn't get to read the whole story about it, but now we're getting that as a news story that just came out. iOS 17.4. Apple Podcasts will now offer auto-generated transcripts. That's a new thing that's coming in now next. Apple will automatically generate transcripts after a new episode is published. Your episode will be available for listening right away, and the transcript will be available shortly afterwards. There will be a short delay while we process your transcript. If portions of your episode changed with dynamically inserted audio, Apple Podcasts will not display the segments of the audio that have changed since the original transcription. Music lyrics are also not displayed in the transcripts. And listeners can follow along with the transcript, much like how real-time lyrics work in Apple Music, and the text highlighting in sync with the audio for the shows. That is cool as shit. That's very cool. So that's coming up now for folks. And learning from Digiday about podcast networks using AI tools for faster translation. Well, I can tell you that I use OpenAI for quite a bit when I need to go and rewrite stories. Like I'll take my information and that sucker just go and generate it out. I'm not afraid to say that. Because what I'm saying out of my mouth is more important than what I'm writing in the description. I will just say that. Podcast networks are like Acast, iHeartMedia, and Spotify are testing tools to increase outreach to prospective clients, expand the range of shows that fit a buyer's brief, and translate shows into different languages. So now they want to test translations, iHeartMedia, and technology will be used to transcribe, translate, and then voice translations. iHeartMedia looks to debut 5 to 10 shows translated into languages like Spanish, French, German, and Italian. And shows will be likely to be evergreen, general interest shows, and limited series shows, but he declined to share the names of the shows. Spotify will do the same thing, generative AI to translate podcast audio. They're launching a pilot program as of September with a few podcasters to test AI-generated voice translations into other languages. I like all that. That's actually pretty cool. National Public Media, Gina Garuba, President and CEO, says that AI will become a big deal in podcasts this year in areas like content creation, commercial messaging creation, audience targeting, but NPR is not ready to discuss how the technology will apply to NPR yet. But they're not testing technology yet for those use cases. But they're also trying to say that generative AI tools will not replace human talent, especially hosts. That's Conal Byrne actually talking about that as well. The head of podcasting over at iHeartMedia for them, Conal Byrne. Right. That name. Been a lot of talk about American Federation of Musicians. They're starting to talk with studios, Hollywood labor leaders to lend support in a picket. The AMPTP also showed unity, joining with them. So American Federation of Musicians, they are now going after the fact that they want to go after what Hollywood writers and actors were going on strike for last year. They're seeking to completely block artificial intelligence or instrument replacement technology. They want to make sure musicians can use it as a tool, but are not cast aside in the process. The association represents 70,000 members across the U.S. and Canada, including recording musicians, as well as touring artists and orchestra and nightclub performers. Their film and TV contract was originally set to expire November 13th, but it was extended by 6 months in the right of the Writers Guild and SAG-AFTRA strikes. Talks are scheduled to take place over the next 2 weeks. AMPTP looks forward to productive negotiations with the Federation, the goal of concluding an agreement that will ensure an active year ahead of the industry and recognize the value that musicians add to motion pictures and TV. So AMPTP continues to go along. Now they have to deal with the musicians that work on a lot of Hollywood projects. They got that next. 2 more stories to bring up before we wrap things up. Odyssey, the ongoing bankruptcy bullshit they're going through. Let's go through something else that's going on right now. Here we go. Yes. They're planning for subscription streaming service in response to the growing digital trend. So, digital has been to their forefront. They're going to plan a launch of a subscription streaming service that will offer Odyssey projects that could deliver as much as $20 million in revenue by 2027. That's not a big lot of money. That's not going to take care of the other $500 million in debt they have left, right? Out of the $1.3 billion that they have. Oh no, they have $300 million, I guess, in debt. I think that's what's left, right? Still, that's a lot. The plan was kept confidential until the chapter filing this month. Audacity's been working to accelerate its penetration of the digital media marketplace, leveraging partnerships with TuneIn to distribute their broadcast content and podcasts to streaming listeners, and leveraging sales and ad tech capabilities to sell advertising for other broadcasters. This business plan banks on the further growth of Odyssey's podcasting business. They expect the business will grow at an annual rate of 25% through 2027 with improving profit margins. Still not enough. I mean, you're doing more and doing the same thing here. Yeah. It's just bullshit. Finally, Peak TV has it finally unpeaked. A story from IndieWire talks about this. And there was a point where John Landgraf, the FX chief, first coined the term Peak TV. And we see that it's not happening as much anymore. John Landgraf was part of the great time of FX and all the great programming that came from it. Damages, Sons of Anarchy, Shield, American Horror Story, Justified, pick 'em. Great shows coming from FX. So enjoyable. And so many others I didn't even watch. Snowfall I never watched. Rescue Me I never watched. Louie I never watched. There are so many other shows. Sunny Day in Philadelphia. I never watched any of those shows. Maybe at some point I will. I don't know. 2022, 661 U.S. scripted series were ordered. 418 were ordered in 2023, down 37%. And the story says here that we're never going to see a year where we're going to get over 500 annual U.S. scripted series releases anytime soon, possibly ever. So it's continue to go down. Streaming video on-demand services released 77 fewer seasons of TV than last year than 2022. Linear TV, 55 fewer seasons. Streaming will not see a similar rebound. Netflix alone reduced releases from 107 to 68 year to year. And that became before the actor strike and the writer strike. Peacock down 20 seasons. Hulu 11. Max 9. Paramount Plus 4 fewer shows. So you're seeing even less shows that are going on before. I don't know. That's why I guess I'm watching shows like Hawaii Five-0 so much, and I'm enjoying them. You know, the original Hawaii Five-0, right? McGarrett, all that. Amazon Prime. I'll tell you, it does really give them a whole lot of good down there. And I have to think about the fact that maybe down the line, I'm going to eventually have to go and maybe look at Netflix in 2025. So I can watch WWE maybe. And maybe not just Monday Night Raw. Maybe we'll get some other shows that will be on there, but I don't know yet. I look at it and I say to myself, man, you know, why do I have time to go and watch that when honestly, I'm making time enough right now just to go and do the podcast, like these shows. Like I said, I did a show half an hour already before this show to talk about wrestling because of a breaking news story. And then the news layoffs today. I got so much time to talk, so much time to do podcasts that maybe it doesn't matter how much TV I'm watching. Well, that's the show for tonight. Thanks for listening in. Finding it as you always do, kingofpodcasts.com. Find me on all the social media channels. TikTok, X, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, LinkedIn, at King of Podcasts. And until next week, remember the content is king. And the control of your content is in your hands.